I want to welcome everybody in. We will be getting started at about 12:03. We want to make sure that everybody has their chance to jump onto Zoom. I'm Paul Clifford, and I'll be introducing Jackie Esposito in just a couple minutes. If you could, go ahead and drop a note in the chat and let us know where you're Zooming in from and what your class year is. Again, we'll be getting started in just a couple minutes. I'm seeing the number continue to climb, now over 84 participants here for Jackie Esposito from the Paterno Petit Library. She will be with us in just a couple minutes. Again, go ahead and drop in the chat where you're from and what your Penn State class year is. We'll be getting started in just a couple minutes. Welcome. Again, welcome everybody. All 92 people participating, up over 95 people now. Thank you for joining us. Go ahead and drop where you're Zooming in from today and your class year in the chat. Let us know who you are and where you're from and when you graduated from Penn State. See a lot of people chiming in. Bellefonte, class of 1985 is represented. I see you, Michelle Moore. I see Denise Corcoran from the large metropolis of downtown Cunningham, Pennsylvania, representing the class of 1989. Roger Williams right here at home in State College, representing the class of 73. Welcome, Roger. And again, we are just going to get started in just a couple minutes. Jeff and Margie Lohr are representing the class of 1966. I see Bruce France from Decatur, Illinois, and Dana from Erie, class of 90. Welcome. Cape Cod is represented by Paul McCogney. Cape Cod, class of Penn State, class of 1960. I see Ruth and Bruce Bauman. And Dr. Bundy from the class of 1970. If you are interested in hearing more from Dr. Bundy, the leader of the band, you can tune in tomorrow for coffee hour, tomorrow night, in a special edition of We Are Weekend Coffee Hour at 6 o'clock. Again, go to alumni.psu.edu/events for all Penn State Alumni Association events. We will be getting started in just a minute with Jackie Esposito from the Penn State Libraries. Well, I am pleased to welcome everybody in. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Paul Clifford, CEO of the Penn State Alumni Association, and I'd like to welcome everybody to today's virtual speaker session. As a reminder, today's discussion is being recorded. Today, we welcome Penn State librarian and archivist Jackie Esposito. Today's discussion is the latest installment of a recurring series of virtual programming that the Alumni Association is bringing to the Penn State community. We'll be speaking with experts, university leaders, who will share their insights and perspective with you in the coming weeks and months. Additionally, the Alumni Association offers a host of online networking events, career programs, and webinars, and you can view a full list at alumni.psu.edu/events. Now I'm happy to welcome Jackie Esposito, who has been actively engaged in the management and preservation of university archival collections for over 30 years. She began serving Penn State in the fall of 1986 as a project archivist and was promoted through the ranks to her current position as full librarian. In addition to working with the university's archival collections, she is currently overseeing an extensive oral history project for the university libraries entitled Library Legacies. She's the author of numerous articles and book chapters on archives management, higher education legislation, and records issues, as well as co-author of The Nittany Lion and Illustrated Tale. Jackie will take us on a walk down memory lane, highlighting the events, people, and issues that made the Penn State undergraduate experience both unique and extraordinarily special in the 1960s and 1970s. Thank you for joining us, Jackie. Take it away.
Thank you, Paul. And it's my pleasure to be here to talk about the 1960s and early 1970s at Penn State. I will make one disclaimer. I will talk about a lot of things and a lot of people, but I will not be able to cover everything. So if you have questions, you certainly can contact me through the Alumni Association. I'm going to share my screen because I do have a PowerPoint, and we will entertain questions as soon as the PowerPoint is over. Okay, so I wanted to start this presentation with the song lyrics. And the song lyrics are from a popular song that was written in 1968 by Mary Hopkins. And it talks a lot about what we're going to see in the 1960s and 70s at Penn State. The song begins, "Once upon a time there was a tavern," probably first if it was Penn State, "where we used to raise a glass or two. Remember how we laughed away the hours and think of all the great things that we would do. Those were the days, my friend. We thought they'd never end. We'd sing and dance forever and a day. We'd live the life we choose. We'd fight and never lose, for we were young and sure to have our way." Mary Hopkins wrote that song in 1968, and it tells a lot about the attitude and feelings of undergraduates who were in college in the 1960s. Everything was possible, everything was doable, and everything was going to change. The theme behind the 1960s and 70s at Penn State were moments of change and moments of triumph. There were lots of change between 1960 and the mid-1970s. There would be a change in presidents in the country. There would be a change in presidents at Penn State. There would be changes in rules and regulations on campus. There would be changes in how we looked at things. There would be protests. There would be dances. There would be music differences. And all of those things would lead to differences in terms of how the people, the undergraduates, the faculty, the staff would change Penn State in the coming decades through the 1970s and 80s. You'll notice some of the pictures that are on here are actually from campus, and the difference in the early 1960s, for example, between the dance at the Armory, and by the early 1970s, the Armory wasn't even on campus anymore. Among the things that are significant in the 1960s that will influence what changes at Penn State are things like the differences between the presidency of Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon, the manned moon mission where Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, Woodstock and the music changes that are involved in Woodstock, the Vietnam War, the introduction and use and growth of computers. By the way, the picture down there was the average size of a computer in the 1960s, not like the computers we have now. And then we would be influenced by the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy in 1968. The photo that's on the screen right now is Martin Luther King when he was at Penn State in 1965. It was Rec Hall, and from what I'm told, you could hear a pin drop when he talked to the students and faculty at Penn State in 1965. So there would be lots of changes. There would be lots of differences for the students who started in the 60s and for the students who would come in the 70s and beyond the 70s. Among the changes were things like tuition and room and board. This is the tuition, this is the room and board in 1970. The room and board was $130 a month. Tuition was $200 per term. The campus was on a term system, not a semester system. So there was a fall, winter, spring, and summer terms. The enrollment for 1969-1970 was about 46,000 students. For those who are interested right now, it's closing in on almost 100,000 students. Of the 46,000, 27,000 plus were at University Park, and another 19,000 plus were at the Commonwealth campuses. And in 1970, 8,829 degrees were conferred at graduation. To put it in some kind of context, I included the cost of living for 1970, not for shock value, but so that you could understand the difference between what room and board and tuition were then and what it is now. And things like gasoline being 36 cents and a movie ticket $1.55. Minimum wage was $2 an hour. So things have certainly changed over the decades. These pictures are the students who were at Penn State in the 1970s. They're gatherings of students on campus. It's what classrooms look like. It's guarding the shrine. It's all kinds of activities and classes that happened at campus. One of the questions that comes up a lot when you talk about the 1960s and 70s at Penn State has to do with the discrepancy between the number of male students and the number of female students. And I will answer that question now because you'll notice from the pictures I have up there, there's a lot more male students than there are female students. That was a tradition. It was not a rule. It actually had more to do. It was a rule in 1946, post-World War II, in response to the GI Bill. It continued for many years. But it was not a university policy. It was based on cultural norms about who attended college. And it does change significantly starting in the mid-1970s with the Title IX legislations and with the civil rights changes that come in the 1970s and the women's rights changes that come in the 1970s. But it was never a written policy past 1946. With the GI Bill, there were more male students allowed on campus, and it just continued that way for almost 3 decades. Many of the activities on campus would have been the same activities we see now. Students getting together, students going to games, students going to classes. There were fraternities and sororities and honoraries and all kinds of activities. The calendar was different, and some of the activities were different. There were rules that were different. One of the things in the 60s, for example, was that women students did not live downtown. They were not allowed to live downtown. Women students had to live on campus. It was part of the in loco parentis rules that were set up in order to make sure that women were protected while they were on campus. Women don't get permission to move off campus until the fall of 1970 and the spring of 1971. Penn State also stops building dorms at that point, and that's when the growth of housing units downtown happens. We're seeing a similar growth right now, but 1970s is when you see all of the development of the Beaver Canyon buildings and rentals. If you were going to register for classes, you were in lines. You first went to see your advisor, then you got in line at Rec Hall, you got to the various tables, and it was the beginning of a punch card system for classes. But the students in the 1960s would be the first students that would actually have classes in the Willard building. The armory was torn down. Willard building was built, and it was built as a classroom building. You would get your bursar's receipt, and you would do your registration there, all physically. You would have punch cards, and you have cards for specific classes. The picture in the middle are students meeting with President Eric Walker. Eric Walker was president from 1953 to 1970. He leaves office in 1970 and is followed by Dr. John Oswald, and we'll talk about him in a few minutes. The picture at the bottom is moving in. For those of you who remember moving in, and other activities on campus. There were a lot of new dorms being built around in the 1960s, and the dorms were not mingled. There were women's dorms and men's dorms. There was a women's residence council, a men's residence council, and there were dorms built closer and closer to where Beaver Stadium is now, which was considered at the time the farms. There were very strict rules, and there were curfews. There were curfews for every single day, and there were curfews and rules about who could visit and who couldn't visit, and what materials could be in the dorms and what materials couldn't be in the dorms, as well as who could visit. Also, dorms were not single rooms residence. Dorms were usually 4 students, 3 to 4 students in a room, not single room dorms like we have today. This particular photo, this big photo in the middle, is the photo of significance when you talk about the dorms and the residence halls, because this was the line to wait to get into the lottery for the residence halls. And you would get in line and you would put in your application for residence halls, and these were the lines that you'd wait on for residence halls. The picture on the right with a young Robert Redford is a dorm room, and then there were other posters and cultural icons during the 1960s and 70s. Classes were usually large. The classes were many of the classes that you would see typically today, although some of the colleges changed. One of the biggest changes in the 1960s were changes in specific colleges. So Earth and Mineral Industries became Earth and Mineral Sciences. Health and Home Economics became Health and Human Development. There were changes in Rec Hall. So there's a lot of changes academically at Penn State in the 1960s and 70s to look at exactly what kinds of classes we were having. And part of it had to do with an expansion of research. During Milton Eisenhower's presidency from 1953 to 1960, there was a lot of research, a lot of growth in research. And that growth in research led to changes in academics and the types of classes that would be offered at Penn State, including changes in classes and changes in colleges. Arts and architecture was established as a college, business administration was established as a college, and there were a lot of changes in terms of how we looked at academic disciplines like home economics in terms of the scientific nature of home economics. You can see Willard Building is prominent because it was the newest classroom on campus. It wasn't the only building that was built on campus. During the 1960s, buildings like Hammond Building were built on campus. There was a building boom of not only of classroom buildings and office buildings, but of dorms. There were also a lot of building being done at the campuses. So if you go through the history of any of the Commonwealth campuses during this period of time, you'll notice that there's a great deal of change to what's happening at the campuses in terms of classroom buildings and study halls and dorms being built on the campuses. It was still a lot of chalk and talk, and that has changed over the decades, where we do a lot more stuff with technology. This past spring semester in particular. But there was a lot of classroom, and you'll notice that in the picture at the bottom, there is an early computer. So there were some attempts to bringing technology into the classroom as early as the 1970s. The town and gown relations during the 1960s and 70s were a little bit strained, mostly because there was a lot of activity by students downtown. Those of you who are locals will notice the picture, the far left picture of the Hotel State College, and you will notice that College Avenue was a two-way street. College Avenue is no longer a two-way street. As a matter of fact, as I was putting this together, my daughter noticed that picture and told me it was wrong. It's not wrong. It actually, College Avenue was two-way street, Beaver Avenue was a two-way street, and that got changed. You'll notice the various theaters and restaurants, and the building in the middle, which is now a jewelry store, actually was a cooperative farm agreement where you could do as a food co-op, and you'll see a lot of residents in the town as well. Part of the problem with the relationship with town and campus had to do with what was perceived to be student behavior, but also had to do with a lot of growing pains. Town was getting bigger, town was getting more populated, and the university was changing its policies about building dorms. And so there was a little bit of a push about what kinds of things could happen downtown and where things could happen downtown. Other issues had to do with student relations. There was a long-running issue with the Sun Apartments about their rules and regulations for rentals. There were many different restaurants and stuff downtown, as well as rental apartments downtown. And so there were a lot of changing sceneries in terms of the downtown in State College. Also, State College was growing in terms of suburbs. The Ferguson Township, Patton Township, as well as Boalsburg area and the growth towards Bellefonte. All of those were growing in the 60s. So there were a fair number of growing pains in terms of development in State College in the center region. Things that were happening in the 60s and 70s that students were aware of were changes in culture. So we had, Star Trek and Easy Rider and the Beatles. The Beatles were huge. TV shows like Laugh-In, and the #1 song in 1970 was Simon and Garfunkel's Bridge Over Troubled Water from their mega album, Sounds of Silence. So there was a lot of questioning, a lot of changes, a lot of asking, why are we doing what we're doing, and what can we do to make things different? Remember, I said that the decades were very much moments of change and moments of triumph. There were a great many activities on campus, as there are now, a lot of student groups. The one that would be different today than different in the 1960s and 70s than today would be the Students for a Democratic Society, the SDS. The Students for a Democratic Society were looking to change things on campus. We're looking to change culture, and we're looking to have impact on campus. There was a very active thespians group, lots of societies and Glee Club. And perhaps the biggest impact, especially in 1970, was the start of Earth Day and the development of the group Echo Action. This year is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, and Earth Day was really important. There was a feeling nationwide that citizens had to take care of the earth. It was the only earth that we had, and we had to be sure to take care of it. And university students were the front people in terms of some of those movements. And you can see from this picture that it was very active at Penn State, and the development of Echo Action was one of the major initiatives in 1969, 1970 in terms of the development of Earth Day protocols and procedures and Save Our Planet and sustainability, something that we talk a lot about now. There were other significant groups like the Daily Collegian, and you'll notice in this particular article from the Daily Collegian that the Interfraternity Council is voting to revise visitation restrictions. There were very strict rules about that. Fortunately, for nowadays, you can actually look at the Collegian. It's all digitized and online, and the links to these digital resources will be provided to you at the end of this presentation. In addition to the Daily Collegian and the Levy, which obviously was responsible for some of these photos, the humor magazine was Froth. And Froth was a humor magazine that had started in the 1920s and was revived during the 1960s and was fairly scandalous. It included lots of photos and lots of activities. It even included, at one point, one issue has a Vietnam board game, and you could play the Vietnam board game in terms of you as a student and what your relationship to going to Vietnam and not going to Vietnam and not being called in the draft. Again, Froth is also digitized, as well as the Daily Collegian and the Levies, as well as other major collections from Penn State. There were many personalities on campus. There were big personalities, the USG president, the president of the Black Students Association, the Homecoming Queens and Bells, as well as athletic leaders and group leaders, and the Nittany Lion in a Nittany Lion suit that you might not recognize. Back in 1970, the Nittany Lion suit was still made of rabbit fur, and so it was fairly hot and humid, and would be a challenge to wear on a day when there were a lot of touchdowns. Penn State has now, and has had for many, many decades, one of the largest Greek systems in the country. The Greek organizations were very active. It also had a number of African-American Greek organizations from the Divine Nine. The Greek organizations were involved both in community activities and as well as social activities, and were very involved with interactions, town and gown interactions. There were many honoraries that recognized student achievement. Penn State students have always been high achieving students. This year, for example, Penn State students were among the highest in terms of Fulbright awards. In the 1970s, that was true as well. Penn State students led the way in joining things like the Peace Corps and activities such as activities within the United States that serve under the Peace Corps. But we also had a good showing with honoraries such as Skull and Bones and Lion's Paw. We also have had a major representation in terms of ROTC. Penn State, because of its land grant history, has always had military training as part of the curriculum, and has in the 1960s, as today, as one of the largest ROTCs outside of a military academy. It wasn't necessarily as appreciated in the 1960s as it is today, but it was large and it was active, and the ROTC recognitions continued during the period of the 1960s and were responsible for a lot of the officers that went off to participate in the Vietnam War. We did have an active blue band and active musical groups. As was mentioned, Dr. Bundy came on to be the head of the blue band. His son is now involved at Penn State as part of the development office. Actually, he runs the development office. But the musical activities at Penn State were far and wide, from various symphonic bands and singing groups to a cappella groups and to the blue band participation at the various games and tournaments. And we did have sports at Penn State, and we had some really good years in the 1960s. And while I will not debate whether or not we should have been number one, we should have, we had 2 consecutive football teams that went to the Orange Bowl. We had 2 consecutive football teams in 68 and 69 that were at the top of their games. They had a vocal coach, Coach Paterno, and they were well received. And they did go to the Orange Bowl in 1969, and they went in the Orange Bowl again in 1970. And because of some political wranglings, they were not named the number 1 team in the country. That was unfair and it shouldn't have happened. And we will move on from there. If you look at the picture where the oranges are being poured out on the top, you'll see Mike Reed, who went on to be a Grammy Award-winning songwriter, country music star. The football team was quite successful. The football team was responsive to Paterno's action that they would be not only athletes, but they would be student academics as well. They would be good students. And Paterno does go on later in the 70s to offer a commencement speech where he talks about the grand experiment and what it would be like to be both athletes and academics. We also had other well-known sports, and that included sports like wrestling and gymnastics, track and field. What's interesting about Penn State sports in the 1960s is the focus that was made on intercollegiate athletics for women. In the mid-1960s, it was established that there would be intercollegiate athletics for women, and it was 9 years before Title IX. So Penn State followed Title IX when it came about, but prior to Title IX, 9 years before Title IX, we established a Penn State Women's Intercollegiate Association. And that included sports like basketball and lacrosse and softball. In addition to that, we had very strong teams in terms of wrestling, which we still have, gymnastics, track and field, and very famous participants, both at the national level and tournament level and in the Olympics. Penn State has over time had over 400 athletes in the Olympics. And so it was an amazing time for athletics at Penn State. The biggest thing of note in the papers, and the biggest thing that students probably remember about Penn State in the 1960s, was student activism. There was student activism all over the country. There was student activism at Penn State, and it was activism for numerous issues. There were activism for civil rights, both having Martin Luther King on campus and having civil rights around the country meant that there was civil rights protest at Penn State. Penn State needed to bring more African-American students on campus, and the town needed to be more diverse. And that was just a reality during the 1960s at Penn State. We needed more women's rights at Penn State. And so there were protests for women's rights. There were large protests that were anti-war protests. Penn State has had a contract with the Department of Defense since the 1940s. And as the Vietnam War became more and more unpopular, there were protests that were anti-war protests, specifically based on Penn State's research for the Department of Defense. There were major activities, and the protests, especially in 1968, 69, 1970, became very large and very disruptive. And at one point in 1970, campus was shut down and students were sent home. And there was a pass-fail system of grading set up to accommodate the weeks that were lost on campus. For those of you who were around this past semester, it's very familiar. It wasn't a pandemic in the 1960s, late 1960s, early 1970s. It was war protests. In 2020, it was a pandemic that sent students home and set up a pass-fail system of grading. There were sit-ins. There were sit-ins in Old Main. There were sit-ins in the president's office. There were charges brought against students for disruption. There were protests for the homeless. There were meetings with the board of trustees. There was a lot of student vocal protest about Penn State. All of that to say that there were changes made. The changes were not made quickly. The changes were made over time. So by the mid-1970s, there were changes made to bring in more women, more African-American students. There were changes made about rules and procedures for students. Women could live downtown. There were changes made in terms of how research was done on campus. That's not to say that we can't do better. We can always do better. But the student voices were heard and the student voices were impactful on campus. In addition, in the 1960s, Penn State opened the Hershey Medical Center. 1969 was the year when the first students went to the Hershey Medical Center and went to the College of Medicine at Penn State. The Hershey Medical Center, which has grown to be one of the major medical centers in the country, matter of fact, was just named one of the #1 children's hospitals, was vitally important in terms of not only research, but education for family practice and family medicine, as well as for things like the heart assist pump. It's also significant as we go on in the decades for Penn State with the growth and the development of the dance marathon. There was a lot of other research that went on at Penn State in the 1960s and 70s. There was a lot of research on computers and computer technology. There was a lot of research on how to make computers work. And Penn Stack, which is the photograph there, was developed and ran at Penn State in terms of one of the first fully electronic digital computers. It was built in the early 1950s, and by the mid-1960s was doing tests for lots of things. There were tests for the space program. There were tests for biomechanics. There was research on atmosphere and weather. There was research in terms of the humanities as well as arts and architecture. And Penn State in the 1960s, early 1970s became a center as a #1 research institution in the country. In 1970, President Eric Walker decided that it was time for him to leave the presidency. He had been president since 1956 when Dwight Eisenhower left. He decided it was time for him to leave. He leaves at the end of the spring semester in 1970. He's followed by John Oswald, who meets with students, who meets with faculty and staff, and who develops some of the changes that we'll see in the 1970s at Penn State. Dr. Walker was an engineering researcher and continued doing his engineering research in his retirement. He actually kept an office right in Hammond Building until he passed on. As we look toward the future, the class of 1970 is very influential. It's influential in terms of what happens from the social activism that they learned at school, that they came to school with, the social justice movements that they participated in. There were a lot of graduates who participated in programs well past graduation. Among the things that they were really responsible for was the development and growth of the Renaissance Fund. As the class gift for the classes of 1969, 70, 71, funds were provided to support the best and brightest students who had the greatest financial need. The Renaissance Fund is one of the largest scholarship funds at Penn State. It was established in 1969, and the class gifts continued to go to the Renaissance Fund. And the Renaissance Fund recognizes outstanding Penn Staters and recognizes outstanding Penn State students and provides a really good program for scholarships for Penn State students. And its symbol is the tree because it means it's growing and everything is changing. And actually, it's an apt name for a scholarship because there was a major renaissance at Penn State in the 1960s and 70s. Penn State became socially aware. Penn State became socially just and looked at the demands that were made by students and actually listened to the students and started making changes. And then there are the graduates. The graduates go on to great careers. They go on to great careers as authors and scientists and CEOs, as the head of the music, as the head of the blue band, as authors and participants in numerous activities. This is only a small sampling of all of the alums from the class of 1970 and all the major things that they went on to do. They went on to become 2- and 3- and 4-star generals. They went on to become astronauts. They went on to become civic leaders and movers and shakers in their local communities. And it's actually what we kind of expect from Penn State graduates, that they will go on and make an impact because of what they learned and what they have been taught at Penn State. Resources for Penn State alums are available at the Alumni Library online. You can go online and you can use the major resources that the library provides for you. It gives you access to the digital materials I talked about. It also gives you access to the databases that we use today to find articles and patents and trademarks. And so if you get an opportunity, you want to look at the Alumni Library online. These resources are resources I used in preparing some of these materials. One of the interesting ones is called the 1968 Project. It looks at what was happening in 1968 around the country and at Penn State, and it uses oral history interviews with alums to talk about what was going on at Penn State in the 1960s. There's also the digital Collegian, the digital yearbook, and Froth. What's really